Hey everyone, Dr. L here with your overview of your final exam for SOC 1101 Spring 2026. Although I may use this in future semesters, so that is also an FYI. So, at first, I'm going to start off with some of the logistical factors of you completing this assignment. Then, I'm going to go into an example recording to sort of outline the expectations as far as what your final exam recording should look like. And I'll also highlight different aspects of my PowerPoint that are relevant and things you should keep in mind as you finalize your PowerPoint for your recording as well. So, the first thing I want to point out is where to find the guiding documents for this assignment. So, you'll see here that I'm in student view for eLearn. I am in the page for my blended class because I prioritize my blended classes that only meet half as much as my regular face to face classes when I make recordings. However, the way that I organize my eLearn pages is essentially the same for all of my classes. So you should be able to find the guiding documents you need for this assignment and all important documents for our class, regardless of what section of Social 1101 you're in. So, as always, you go to content, and then if you go to important documents, you might need to drop down. You'll see that, of course, the syllabus always has information, sort of a big picture overview of all assignments. And you've had that since the first day of class. And so you'll see here that for the final exam, there's a blurb about that here. For details regarding when your class is expected to complete and submit the final exam on eLearn, you can go to your schedule here. And then if you scroll down a little bit further, one of the last, if not the last document in the important documents folder is going to be the final exam rubric. Now, this rubric is pretty much the same as the midterm exam. The expectations are the same. The only difference is that you're focusing on on six of the selfie entries that were required for the second half of the semester after your midterm exam was due. And again, for details on those selfie entries, you can refer to the course schedule. So there's sort of two important things I want to point out as far as how the final exam rubric sort of deviates from the midterm exam. So you'll see here that there's a note about the fact that you can use the same PowerPoint you use for your midterm exam for the final exam. So you can continue adding your selfie entries to that same PowerPoint document. When it comes time to record, you can just sort of gloss over those 6 selfie entries you did for your midterm exam from the first half of the semester. And I'll demonstrate what that might look like when I get into my example recording in just a second. Uh, Someone asked in one of my classes in the exit pass early on this week, they wanted to know, can I start a new PowerPoint for my final exam? Because I really want to change how I organized everything. You can. However, it's also pretty easy to make changes to your overall PowerPoint document. So you can also make those changes as needed in the document you use for your midterm exam, and then continue adding the selfie entries that are required for the second half of the semester for your final exam. So I'm open to whatever you want to do as long as you meet all of the components and requirements for the final exam as outlined on the assignment rubric. But if you're interested on creating a new document, a new PowerPoint document for your final exam, and you're the person who raised that question in the exit pass, or perhaps that question resonates with you, email me on an individual basis for confirmation. And then the other thing is that for the second half of the semester, there are more than 6 opportunities to complete selfie entries. And so it says that there are 7 opportunities. I believe there's actually 8 opportunities the second half of the semester. But regardless of how many opportunities there are, you are only required to complete and include 6 selfie entries for your final exam. I intentionally add extra weeks the second half of the semester because I know that with the group project, as well as other class requirements and final exam requirements you might have in your other classes, you need a little bit more grace and wiggle room as far as completing assignments. And so if you get behind on your selfie entries, and a lot of students have indicated throughout the semester or the second half of the semester in the exit pass that you have indeed gotten behind, you can skip 2 weeks of selfie entries and still have the required 6 selfie entries. Now, someone asked in one of my classes, if I do more than 6 selfie entries, like I do 7 or 8, because I'm just keeping up with the class, can I include those extra selfie entries on my final exam PowerPoint, or do I need to delete them? You can absolutely keep them. You're not going to get um, point deduction for having them, but you should really focus on only the 6 selfie entries when you do your recording. If for no other reason than if you do more than 6, you might end up going over the time frame that I sort of expect for the final exam recording. All right, and so just make sure you download this document and you go over all of the different components as well as the breakdown of how you'll be assessed and graded for this assignment. All right, without further ado, here is my PowerPoint where I've been logging all my selfies throughout the semester. You'll see that this looks very similar to my midterm exam PowerPoint because I'm using the same file. I'm just adding the 6 required selfie entries for the second half of the semester. So if I was a student recording my final exam, I would be starting now. Hey everyone, Dr. L here with my final exam recording. So I'm going to go ahead and get into presenter view. And you'll see here that I updated the title slide to include the fact that this is the final exam rather than the midterm exam. Here you'll see that this is an introduction for all of the slides that are included in my PowerPoint, but for the purpose of today's recording, I'm going to start here with selfie entries 7 through 12, followed by a final exam conclusion, and then I'll show you my references and I'll thank you for being such an engaging audience. So just as a refresher, this is my midterm exam, the 6 selfie entries I did for the first half of the semester. And I'm just going to sort of gloss over those for our purposes because for this recording, I'm really focusing in on the final exam and these 6 selfie entries for the second half of our class, which you can see here. All right, so let's dig on into the final exam. For selfie entry 7, which was the first opportunity after the midterm exam, we focus on celebrating Black History Month outside of the month of February. This unit aligns with the readings for our unit on race and ethnicity. And so for my key term, I focused on intersection theory, also referred to as intersectionality or intersectionality theory, as discussed in my lecture toward the beginning of this semester when I defined this theory in my own words outside of the scope of the textbook. Now, for the purpose of the final exam, I rely on the definition from our textbook, and so you'll see that I've cited the textbook here. But according to the authors of our textbook, intersection theory is a theory that suggests we cannot separate the effects of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and other attributes. So, thinking about issues related to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and other attributes regularly, rather than for 1 month of the year, allows us to better understand systemic racism, systemic sexism, and other structural issues, which is usually what we focus on in sociology classes. At the top here, I have a flyer for a movie screening on campus for the film Sinners, which is my favorite movie that came out this past year. Shout out to Michael B. Jordan, who won the Oscar for Best Actor this year. And so having better representation in movies, in the media, and in Hollywood, as well as other better representation in other social institutions, is one way we can sort of combat systemic racism, as well as other isms that exist within social institutions and social structures. The other image is an event I attended on campus about teaching back Black history as resistance, which is another example of how we can combat systemic racism within social institutions. So again, here we're starting to think about how can we apply an intersectional lens to our understanding of systemic issues that exist within social institutions. One way in which we can do that is by celebrating things like Black History Month outside of the scope of February, and sort of dealing with these systemic issues on a regular basis instead of, once a month and then that's it. I also want to point out that intersectionality theory is a theory coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 1980s, and I highly recommend you reading her theoretical work as well as her newer work from 2015, 2016 regarding how to apply intersectional theory to more contemporary issues. Now, for my next selfie entry 8, students were asked to celebrate Women's History Month and or provide documentation of LGBTQ plus representation on campus. This aligned with our unit and our readings related to gender, sex, and those types of things. And so I chose the term homophobia, which is the extreme or irrational aversion to gay, lesbian, bisexual, or all LGBTQ plus people, which often manifests as prejudice and biased behavior. Now, as outlined in our syllabus and in other guiding documents in our class, as highlighted throughout our textbook by our textbook authors, homophobia is one of those other structural barriers and challenges we're looking to combat. And we're thinking critically about what that might look like when we think about specific social